welcome to Pandas Nightmares. In today's video, you will hear some of the scariest things people have ever experienced. If you do like my content, do like and subscribe, as it will help me grow. Since I am a small channel, I am creating content to try to raise funds for my dad's treatment. So if you want to support his ongoing battle, the GoFundMe link is in the description section below. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And now let's get started. Enjoy. Story 1. Camping with friends and fathers. Find old Victorian mine in woods. Decided it's a good idea to break down the wooden barrier blocking the entrance. Go in with torches and all the group. It gets deathly cold and there's zero light other than the torches. Old mining carts left on the rails and frequent rats running around. Imagine V formation moving forward. Guy at the head suddenly gone, like disappear out of thin air. We freak out and see massive hole in ground. Half the group bail and sprint to get dads. The rest of us calling out for the guy and shining torches down. Wind suddenly picks up inside the tunnel and it gets super loud with the mining carts moving and the soot being blown up into our faces. Hear sound of sprinting dads and the guy's father just jumps down, no regard for his own safety. Hear a grunt and a call out to say he's fine but he can't see his son, but there's a tunnel up ahead with light at the end. 12-year-old me nopes the fuck out of there. Turns out, the other tunnel led to a back door which the kid opened, which caused the wind in the tunnel. Neither were hurt as they landed on a massive pile of soot. Every year we go back and have a good laugh about it. Plan on bringing our kids there and scaring the fuck out of them with stories of the haunted mine. Story 2. I was on a camping trip with my close friends when the creepiest thing happened. We were all passed out in our cars, trucks, except for one friend who was asleep by the campfire. There were 3 SUVs, and each had the tailgate open to let some fresh air in, but also more room for our legs. I'm a light sleeper and kept waking up, because it was the most uncomfortable thing ever. And not to mention, the friend passed out by the fire was snoring all night. Well, at some point I fell back asleep, only to be awoken to my girlfriend grabbing my hand. Rather than ask what's wrong or roll over and see what was happening, I had this immediate feeling something wasn't right and that I shouldn't make a noise or even move. I grabbed her hand to let her know I was awake and aware of whatever weird shit was happening. Seconds later, this light is being flashed onto my face and I continued to act like I was asleep. After about a minute, the light goes away and I hear footsteps that follow it as well. I finally open my eyes and look over to my friend's truck to see some creepy guy with a flashlight just gazing at my friends who are asleep. Now keep in mind, by federal law, a forest ranger has to make themselves known if they are going to snoop through someone's campsite. So there went that theory. I quickly laid back down when I realized the person was coming back over. This time I could just hear breathing and no light was on. The person put their arms on my tailgate and just stood there looking down at my girlfriend and I for what felt like eternity. And this whole time, I could hear my friend snoring, which made me aware that it wasn't him in a drunken haze being a creeper. What made it worse was the fact that you could hear this person quietly talking to himself and laughing. If you saw the area we went camping, you'd think of The Hills Have Eyes. Story 3. I was about 3 years old and walking with my mum on a sidewalk near a small park. I get this weird sinking feeling as I step out and hear this metallic grinding sound before realizing there's nothing beneath my feet. It felt a lot like that moment in cartoons when a character steps off a cliff and into thin air, suspended until they realize they should be falling. Apparently sewer workers had forgotten to secure the manhole cover, so as soon as I stepped on it, it slid open and I fell through. Luckily, my mum hucked out and managed to grab my hands as I was falling and pulled me out. My white tights were filthy with wastewater, and I remember being numb with shock and totally quiet as my mum and I went to an antique store across the street to call the police. There is no question that I would have died if it weren't for my mum and her super fast reflexes. Story 4. When I was 8, my dad was taking flying lessons. Instead of driving or flying commercial on a trip to my grandparents', he decided to splurge and fly a small charter plane. He was the co-pilot, and the main pilot was the guy who had been giving him lessons. Anyway, there were 2 large storm systems in our path, but a sizable gap between them. The main pilot decided that we could fly in that gap. This was a bad idea. In the air, the 2 storms met with our little plane in the middle. I, an 8-year-old boy, could only see darkness outside the plane, with frequent flashes of lightning. This was accompanied by the worst turbulence you can imagine. We're talking enough turbulence that if I wasn't buckled up, I would have been thrown around the cabin. I just sat there with a death grip on my armrests thinking, so this is how I die? And I wonder if this will be on the news. As everything that wasn't buckled down in the cabin flew around me. Eventually, I just hid under a blanket, awaiting what I assumed was the inevitable crash. We ended up barely being able to make an emergency landing at Erie, Pennsylvania. Our destination was Buffalo, NY. We ended up renting a car and driving the rest of the way there and back. That was the end of my dad's flying lessons. I'm 23 now and I still get nervous on planes. Story 5. Once, when I was back in my hometown, I was driving home late one night. The road leading to my house was winding and quite hilly, and as I was driving uphill and turning a corner, I saw a motorbike moped up ahead that was going slowly, accelerated, swerved, and slowed down again. I was quite certain he was drunk, and I had no clue what to do. I just remember hoping that nothing happened to him between there and my house, because I wouldn't know how to react and deal with the situation. He started swerving and veering into the other lane, so I beeped a few times and he would realize and get back on track. This happened several times until someone decided to overtake me. We were going quite slowly, and the guy on the bike must have pulled over and I was able to drive past as well. I'm still reminded of this sometimes, and hope he got home okay. But honestly, I don't know what I would have done if he'd been in an accident, and I was the only person around that night. Story 6. I house sit for a family friend when she goes out of town. The woman who lives there is really into a bunch of spiritual stuff, New Age stuff, Reiki, etc. The very first time I was house sitting, I was outside watering the plants. I was the only one there and had closed the door after me. From the driveway where I was watering, I had a completely unobstructed view of the front door, the only door that was unlocked at the time. When I went back inside, there, on the little table next to the front door, was a half-eaten cookie. The table had been completely clear when I went outside, and I hadn't seen cookies that looked like that anywhere in the house. Nothing too creepy, but very puzzling and unsettling. When the woman returns, I mention it to her, and she laughs and says she gets ghosts all the time. I'm a fairly skeptical person, but honestly, ghosts were the best explanation. The next time I was over, I was pooping around 10:30. The house itself is fairly old and creaks from time to time, but nothing too loud or disruptive. While I was pooping, there comes a single loud knock from the other side of the bathroom door. This wasn't a little creak or pop from the house. It was a loud, determined rap on the door. It was enough to scare my poop back in for the rest of the night. Story 7. The scariest thing happened to me in an old house. I used to rent back in 2008. I came home from work one day and heard a blood-curdling scream come from my crawl space. The entrance to my crawl space was in my coat closet in the foyer. The hatch to get in was still shut, but there was a trail of blood leading up to it, and bloody scratch marks all over it. I knew there was nobody else in the house because my roommate was in Atlanta on a business trip all week. if he had been home, I wouldn't put it past him to have injured himself digging around down there. He constantly had to go down there because he would disconnect the speaker wires running from my receiver to the outdoor speakers. Whenever he pulled the receiver out to plug his laptop in, the wires would yank out of their ports and fall through the hole we drilled in the floor. They didn't have any slack because the idiot at Home Depot that cut them for me didn't know what the hell he was doing. I asked him for 100 feet of 8-gauge speaker wire, and he started cutting me Cat5 cable. How the fuck do you confuse Ethernet with speaker wire? That was the last straw with Home Depot. They already screwed me twice with that shitty Ryobi brand of tools they carry. I bought a Ryobi leaf blower and weed whacker, and neither of them ever started. I think Ryobi is Japan's way of getting us back for nuking them. Story 8. Growing up, I lived in the middle of the woods. No neighbors for about a mile on each side, and we owned 60 acres of forest, then a swamp after that. So basically I lived in the middle of nowhere. One summer when I was about 14, I was out in the middle of the woods playing with my dog. I'm an only child and both of my parents were out of town. When I kept feeling something hit my elbow, I'd go to throw Max's ball, and the bump would make me throw it almost straight up. Assuming it was just me bumping it on trees or something, I ignored it. After the 4th or 5th time of it happening, I thought, well, this sucks, I'll just go home. Walking back, I felt uneasy, but I knew I was just freaking myself out because we were alone. About an hour later, Max and I are at home on the couch when the garage door opens and he starts barking. I hop up to go let in my mum or dad, even though they were home really early. I peered through the peephole and saw the door was still shut, and no one was in the garage. Quieting Max down, I opened the door slowly and called out for my dad. Nothing. No response at all. So I go out to check the door and it's still locked. Okay? Sure. Weird, but oh well. Max heard it too, so at least I know I'm not crazy. About 20 minutes later, I hear the door open again, and this time Max starts growling like crazy. I quiet him down again and just assume it's the wind or something making noise, even though by this point my heart is racing. I hear footsteps come up the stairs and think, oh geez, Dad really is home this time, and hop up and run to the door. It starts to jiggle, so I run faster to let him in. I peep through the hole, and even though my hand is loosely around the jiggling handle, there's no one on the other side of the door. Terrified, I go hide on the couch with all the lights on. Max is still growling. About an hour after that, I start to feel a little better, even though I am still terrified. Then I hear the door handle jiggle again. This time it was Max jiggling it. He needed to go outside, and the only way outside is through the garage. Fantastic. I literally sprint with him to the kennel, and as I'm standing in there, I decide to ask this thing questions to make myself feel better, because I knew it wouldn't answer me. Thinking about what to ask it, my eyes are drawn to the huge heavy oak door on the kennel. It was always open because it was too heavy for me to move easily. I said, okay, ghost. If you're real, you'll shut this heavy door. Nothing. A minute goes by. Nothing. Max is still sniffing around. I turn around to yell at him to hurry up, and then from behind me I hear click. I whipped around and saw the giant door had swung shut and latched. Okay, ... Clearly, it was just the wind. It wasn't really windy, but it was the wind, for sure. Had to be. I proceed, okay, ghost, that was the wind. If you're really real, you'll open this massive door back up. Nothing. I relax a bit and then squat down with my head in on my knees, reminiscing about how lame I just was being scared when I'd hear click-clack. The door was now wide open. Max was done, so we booked it back into the house, locking every door in the house. For the next 4 hours, I would hear the footsteps on the stairs and the door handle jiggling every few minutes, until finally, around 11 p.m., my dad walks in and yells at me for wasting electricity. I never told him or my mum about it until about 4 months later, when my dad came in from hunting after dark. He looked shaken, and I asked him what was wrong. He said he aimed at 2 deer, but missed both completely, because it felt as if something was hitting his elbow and making him shoot way above the deer. That's when I told him everything. Story 9. So I'm from small country in Central Europe. Loads of people have probably never heard of it. It combines small patch of Adriatic Sea and Alps, but landscape is mostly small green hills, each with a little church on top. Almost 2/3 of land is covered with forests, and capital is famous for its Middle Age architecture. It is an adorable country in which most of the time nothing really happens. Like most of the population, I live in the countryside, a few hundred meters apart from closest neighbor, right next to the forest. I spent most of my childhood in that forest. I can still remember which the best trees for climbing were and where certain flowers grew. But the thing I will never forget happened in the summer of 2001. I was just around 12 back then, and I was spending my whole afternoons in the forest. Most of the times I was roaming around with my best friend, but that day I was alone. As I said before, most of the land around here isn't flat. The hill behind our house is quite steep. Right above our house is old orchard my great-granddad planted. And when you come on the top of the hill, you can almost see the capital city in the distance. Then there is big forest that extends across the karst landscape practically right to the Italian border, with a few smaller towns and villages in between. I never really went very far, because I mostly stayed in the area my family owned, but that day I decided I want to see some more. I didn't have much with me, and I didn't tell my parents I was going anywhere far. I always felt very safe in the woods, even though bears were often seen in the area. In reality, the most dangerous thing you can bump into are drunken hunters. Forest is pretty in the summer. Leaves and tall trunks made me feel like I'm in a big cathedral. I started to sing a tune I have heard on the radio some time ago. At that point, I was about an hour and a half walking distance away from home. I decided to stray away from the main road that leads through the forest in big curves and to take the shortcut. Sun was setting and light was making leaves glowing in sharp colors. But soon all the light disappeared, and I find myself wandering in the twilight on territory unknown to me. Wind was blowing and dry branches were making weird noises. I started to feel uncomfortable, and in one sheer moment, I discovered I am lost. I could feel the panic in form of adrenaline that started to flow through my veins. My instincts were screaming to run away, but I forced myself to focus and tried to get orientation. It was all pointless. I had no idea where I was. But soon all the light disappeared, and I find myself wandering in the twilight on territory unknown to me. Wind was blowing and dry branches were making weird noises. I started to feel uncomfortable, and in one sheer moment, I discovered I am lost. I could feel a panic in form of adrenaline that started to flow through my veins. My instincts were screaming to run away, but I forced myself to focus and tried to get orientation. It was all pointless. I had no idea where I was. In one moment I was running, and in the next the floor under me disappeared. I felt that dreadful feeling of falling, similar to one in Very Bad Nightmare, when everything feels like slow motion. Then that awful sound of body hitting the floor. A moment later also came the pain. For a moment I motionless lied on the ground. Finally I pulled myself together and opened my eyes, waiting for them to adjust the thick darkness in the cave where I landed. First, everything was pitch blackness, and then I saw there was a single pair of eyes staring at me for less than a few inches in front of my face. I quickly backed away until I hit something dry and crumbly. Somewhere in the back, fires were lit. First there was one, and then more and more. Until the chamber was fully lit, there were thousands and thousands of eyes watching me. Dead eyes and dry sockets. skin that was stretched over the bones, mouths hanging open like in big shock, but that was only because lips rot in the time that passed. I stared. I wasn't able to move or scream. I am not even sure I was able to breath. I blinked, hoping for a dreadful image in front of me to disappear. As I opened my eyes, all otherwise motionless corpses moved. In the matter of fact, I didn't really see them move, but when I blinked, it was like everything got one step closer. I felt cold sweat slipping down my neck and my eyes began to water. I could help myself. I blinked again. This time, I was completely surrounded. I simply closed my eyes, wishing for all to be just a bad dream. I didn't hear a single sound. I smiled, thinking that soon I will wake up. When I opened my eyes, there was a face, almost touching my face. I could clearly see dried and rotten face, eyes filled with numbness. I started to feel dizzy. I felt something like dust and bones grabbing my hair and tearing my clothes. I felt it, and I didn't feel it, because I became so damn dizzy and sick. I tried so hard to stay conscious, to fight, but I couldn't move a single muscle, and then it was again pitch blackness all around me. I opened my eyes, trying to adjust to the lack of light. I was lying on the forest ground, not so far away from home. In that exact moment, all my body started to function normally. I ran home like a wind. I had no idea how I got there, and I just tried to forget about whole thing, but my peace didn't last very long. Next night, I dreamed about people I saw back there. I woke up to the face looking at me from the window. It was the face of a little girl. She was also dead, and her empty eyes watched me with wild anger as she was clawing the window, trying to get in. I am having the same nightmare for the past 12 years. At that time, I visited many different therapists. They say it is just stress from school and job, that I should try to relax. But how can I relax when every night, as I open my eyes, a girl is one step closer to me? One night, she finally got close enough to mutter just one sentence to me, "Ima need about trifidi." It was at that moment that I realized this creepy female figure off in the distance was 500 feet tall and from the Paleolithic era. Story 10. Up until I was about 8 or so, I lived in a really old house that, since the beginning of time, had been bounced around from relative to relative until eventually my mother had been handed over the keys. It was basically a shit heap. 2 stories, a collapsed balcony on the second level, mold and mildew all over most of the ceilings. 1 tiny bathroom and the toilet was outside, overrun with frogs and spiders, and whatever other kind of hellspawn the Australian outback would throw at us. I was terrified as a child, scared of basically everything. I'm much better now, and have much bigger balls than most of my friends, if I do say so myself. Nonetheless, I would probably have to put the blame on this old house of mine. I remember as a child that I would always have the same dream. I'd start in the kitchen, no idea how I got there, of course. It was during the day, probably later in the afternoon. Nobody was around, so naturally I'd go looking for my mother and father. I'd go to all the normal places. Mum wasn't in the laundry shed or the lounge room. Dad wasn't on the patio outside or up the back of the chicken coop, and my sister wasn't around either. I was starting to get worried, thinking that everyone was gone and they'd left me alone, until I heard a noise above me coming from the second floor, where the bedrooms are. Relieved, I darted towards the stairs and jumped on the first step. Then I felt it. There was something in the back of my head making me stop, the legs still raised up as I prepared to move onto the second step. Something telling me that I shouldn't go up there. Of course, this thought was running rampant in my mind. Don't go up there. Don't go up there. Stay down here. Don't go up there. There's something up there. Finally, my leg dropped before I could reconsider. I pushed myself up those stairs, and even though I didn't want to anymore, I couldn't stop myself, only slowed down. Each step up was taken at an agonizingly slow pace, and I wanted so bad just to go back downstairs and find someone, run to my grandparents' house, and stay with them until my mum was home. But eventually, I rounded the corner, leaving only the last few steps leading up to the floor ahead of me. There was nothing there. I couldn't see anything in the stairwell. I started getting hopeful at this point. Maybe it's okay. Nobody's here. I was just imagining things, and it's going to be fine. I'm still taking the slow steps up when it appears. Something's there. I can't actually remember what it was, and I never could after I woke up. But it was horrifying beyond belief, and I would always try to close my eyes, because that was my thing as a child. If you can't see it, then it can't see you. But I could still see it. I couldn't blink. I couldn't shut my eyes. It was like my eyelids weren't working. I would even try holding my hands in front of my face, but still I couldn't block it out. I could see through my hands, and I couldn't do anything. I was frozen, unable to do anything except stare at this thing all but a meter away from me. Whatever I saw, whatever I did, for those 8 years I was at that house, I had to force myself up the stairs. Day or night, it was horrifying. My mother sighed and tried to reason with me. My father growled at me and called me a coward, and my sister just laughed and said I was retarded. But every time I had to go up those stairs, as soon as I hit the top stairwell, I had to stop and make sure that I could cover my eyes with my hands, or that I could shut my eyes. Of course, it would terrify me most when I'd go to blink and wave my hand in front of my face, and it wouldn't work, and I'd realize I was dreaming. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe. If you want to help in my dad's fundraiser, I would truly appreciate it. Hope you have an absolutely amazing day. You can also check my other videos on screen.